All right. It's looking like most of you are done reading this introduction. I tapped into the books of the Gene Keys quite a bit over the past couple of days as I've been working on producing this deep dive presentation. And it was very difficult at almost all times to like simplify the language of the books and to try and make it any more precise or beautiful. And so I had to start with this because it really does introduce the keys better than I could ever hope to. Richard Rudd is not only an incredible awakened mind, but also an award-winning poet. And so reading the Gene Keys, it really does feel like you are reading some sort of channeled poetry that is almost beyond human invention. So today I'm really excited to just introduce you to the keys. And with that being said, let's dive into the Gene Keys. We'll have time for a Q&A conversation, anything that is confusing or unclear or that you want to hear more about. I want to hear at the end because I want to make this presentation better every single time that I do it. If something pops into your mind, do just take a quick note. You can just write it in the chat. And if you don't send it right away, that way it can be organized at the end. But we can also just converse about it however you want to record your questions. Just make sure you don't lose them. So I know everybody has a different level of exposure or experience with the Gene Keys. So I'm going to be assuming that you have next to zero experience with the Gene Keys in this presentation. And with that, I hope that each of you has gotten the chance to watch the video Common Ground in Module 1. There are a lot of concepts borrowed from the Gene Keys, such as meditation, concentration, contemplation, as well as the difference between awareness and consciousness, and different things like that that are relevant. But I will also try to make those as clear as possible as I share all of this with you. There's literally so much to cover, and so I had to set a few intentions for the presentation, which are to inspire and intrigue you to start your own voyage. There is no possible way for me to teach you about the Gene Keys themselves and your Gene Keys specifically. I can only really do my best service to you by sparking curiosity, because this is not something that can really be shared. In the introduction to the Gene Keys, Richard Rudd talks about how the I Ching, which we'll talk a lot about, was originally devised thousands of years ago and misinterpreted, misused almost, as an oracle system. Oracle meaning predictive system, in which a Gene Keys interpreter or an I Ching interpreter, similar but different systems, and we'll get clear on that. There was a great issue taken with the attempt of others to interpret the story that really lies within your DNA and is unique to you and your perspective or your quality of awareness. And so that is not something that anyone can do for you. But I hope to inspire you to start that journey. And for any of you who don't have any exposure or experience or don't have the books, that's okay. I hope, I've mapped this all out, hoping to inspire you to or not inspire you, but hoping to still allow you to benefit from this presentation just based on the information that really birthed the Gene Keys themselves, which should, even if you don't take the Gene Keys route of exploration, inspire you to question reality and look at reality in a completely different way. So that's my hope for you today. And without further ado, let's dive in. So this is just generally what we're going to cover so that you know the outline, the expectations. First, we're going to start with why you should care. Then we're going to talk about the origins of the Gene Keys, which I've done my best to make simple and concise, but the truth is the origins are very, very much the opposite of simple and concise. Then we're going to talk about what it means to work with the Gene Keys. Thank you to all of you for your input and your curiosities on Slack about what like the Gene Keys mean, because you've really helped shape the intention and the information that I've put into this. Then we're going to just kind of go over what the journey of working with the Gene Keys might look like. I'll tell you a little bit about what my journey has looked like, and then we're going to talk about what it would mean to start your journey, which is inventing your voyage. And then, just to pique your interest right at the end and spark questions, I'm going to just touch on the deeper details of the Gene Keys, some of the things that I really can't encapsulate in just an hour or two. And so that's that. Ready? So let's start with why. Really, there are three primary questions behind the Gene Keys, and that is the question of purpose, love, and prosperity. What is your purpose in life? Are your relationships fulfilling? And ultimately, how integrated are you into your community, the environment, society, humanity? That kind of raises the theme of awareness and consciousness, meaning that awareness is your expression of your soul, but there's a background consciousness to that, which is the spirit that we all share. It's the universal consciousness that expresses itself differently through each of our own unique eyes, and really through our own unique genetic makeup, our DNA. And that's where the Gene Keys starts. But let's talk a little bit more about why. So one of the primary lessons or answers to the question of these three primary questions is, when human beings are in harmony with creation, these three questions simply do not exist. They stop existing because you're not preoccupied with finding the answer anymore, because you are in harmony. And so harmony is kind of the answer. It's both the hardest and easiest thing in the world, to be yourself. And so you'll hear me say a lot throughout SEM. It's a practice in getting out of your own way, because your character and your identity and your ego and everything that you think you are is really just a shroud or a layer blocking the light of your essence from making it out into the world through your action and through your expression and through your art. And that's why we work with the inner child so intimately, because when you're born, you have no rational, logical mind on top of it to speak of. You just are your essence. And then you learn all kinds of qualifiers and labels. And really, as the Toltecs say, you acquire knowledge. And knowledge is dangerous because knowledge requires categorization, division, separation, and ultimately you end up lying to yourself. And those lies include questions like we have here. What is my purpose? Are my relationships fulfilling? And am I really a part of my community? That division arises out of the shrouded layers on top of your essence. And that shroud, that darkening, that's the theme of the shadow. And so the answer to why work with the Gene Keys, why anything, is higher purpose. But higher purpose is not purpose. It's higher than that. It is beyond what we label it as: success, happiness, abundance, wealth, health, love. All of those things are not higher purpose, but they are byproducts of higher purpose, because higher purpose is harmony. Higher purpose is being yourself. And so all of these things are simply byproducts of being in alignment with your higher purpose, which is simply to be yourself, to get out of the way, to surrender to both the shadows, and in doing so, gift yourself the gifts of the Gene Keys, or the gifts of life. You give yourself the gift of learning the lessons. We'll talk more about that soon, but hold this word harmony in your mind. It's subtle in the introduction to the Gene Keys, but it really is the overarching theme. For example, when you walk through the forest, everything is a total mess to someone who might have grown up in the city with its straight lines and sharp angles. And so everything is completely disorganized. But when you walk out into nature, you can't point out any one thing that is out of place, because just because it is messy to the human perspective, it is in total harmony. Everything is just living its essence, in a sense, by just like a stick falling where it may and just lying there. It's not asking, what is my purpose? Or am I a part of my community? Are my relationships fulfilling? And neither are the simple organisms that don't have the mental capacity to ask this question. But human beings are different because we do have the capacity to ask these questions. And self-awareness, self-consciousness is a dangerous thing. Jordan Peterson, who you may know from Instagram, just as a global figurehead or leader, thought leader on personality and character, says that that a little consciousness is a dangerous thing, because you're just conscious enough to be aware of your pain and your capacity to escape that pain, possibly by asking questions or by maybe even going into the pain, but not quite conscious enough to really transcend it, because the answer is to embrace it. And that's what we'll be talking about. And that's what the Gene Keys are all about. And that question, obviously, why, becomes how. How to achieve harmony, how to unlock higher purpose. And the Gene Keys gives us a really, really fantastic and elegant response to that, which is that there are three basic levels of energy. There is the shadow, the low vibe, the low frequency. There's the gift, which is the awakening frequency, the frequency that embraces the energy of allowing, accepting, and eventually embracing the shadows as part of the experience of life. And then there is the Siddhi, which is the transcendent frequency. We'll talk about all three of them in depth, but essentially the Gene Keys gives us three basic instructions for navigating life, navigating the goal of harmony, the goal of getting out of our own way, which is kind of a paradoxical thing, in three steps. First, when you encounter a shadow, you must embrace that shadow through acceptance. The stages of achieving acceptance include allowing, accepting, and then eventually embracing. And then you can move on to opening the gift, opening your heart to the gift, as we say. And you unlock the gift through release, which is really releasing your attachment to the gift by accepting and embracing the fact that the shadow needs space in your life as well. And with enough practice, or paradoxically, just spontaneously, really, the Siddhic frequency is where frequency dissolves and where you begin to totally transcend the yin and yang aspect of reality. You kind of dissolve into the Siddhi by allowing it to just flow through your body unhindered. Now, this is an easy point where confusion can creep in, but all you need to really look at for now is the shadow and the gift, the dark and the light. And we'll talk more about the Siddhi at the end, okay? And so you must embrace the shadow to unlock the gift. But keep in mind that unlocking does not equal solving. Now, you want to solve your problems, but that is precisely the attachment that you need to release. And that's what the Gene Keys hopes to teach you how to do. But whether you work with the Gene Keys or not, that is the process. It's not the problems that you have, but it's the problem that you have with having problems that needs to be not solved, but allowed. And that is how you unlock the gift, which is through acceptance. And so as you've already learned plenty, the three phases of shadow work include allow, accept, embrace. First, you just allow that it exists. Then you can begin to accept and embrace it. So let me tell you this from a little bit of a different perspective. The shadow is the victim perspective, and the gift is the hero perspective. And if the victim and the hero face the same problem, but from different perspectives, they experience different outcomes because they see the same reality in different ways. Is that making sense? And we know this, we know the story, right? There are archetypes in our psyche. When you hear victim, you already know the story, especially in your own life, in the parts of your life where you have either consciously or unconsciously played the victim. And when you hear the word hero, you know the story as well. And this concept of archetypes is relevant in anything that you study, because archetypes belong not to you, but to everybody, because all of you know the victim story and the hero story. And there are many, many different archetypal stories that exist in what Jung called the collective unconscious. It is the unconscious that you acquire simply by being raised by human beings who were raised by human beings who were raised by human beings. We have told these stories really so many times that they don't even have to be taught. They are just embedded in our culture, and they are acquired through simply existing as a part of society. And so archetypes can be called common knowledge. They're from timeless human stories, and they live in the collective unconscious, as I said. And the shadow and the gift frequencies, as well as the siddhi as well, but we're focusing on the first two for now. These are universal stories of the human experience. They apply to every aspect of anything that you could potentially live. And so again, when I say the shadow of judgment paired with the gift of integrity, you can begin to piece together the story. Confusion and imagination, the shadow of arrogance, the gift of leadership. These already exist within your mind. You can begin to interpret a story, whether it's your own or someone else's, just based on the fact that you have been a human for some years. Now, if I paired, for example, confusion and leadership, that wouldn't necessarily go together. Of course, there are some aspects that do. For example, if I say arrogance and integrity, or judgment and leadership, well, to be in integrity would mean to not be arrogant, or to be a good leader would mean to have the gift of discernment as opposed to judgment. And so you see, these are all different expressions of darkness and light. That's what the Gene Keys works with. The words are just the signals that we use to understand the different subtle nuances of the way that we live a shadow and turn it into a gift. Okay, and so it's we'll talk more about this, but essentially the archetypes of the Gene Keys are just the different colors in the palette that life uses to paint the picture of your life. And that's what the Gene Keys is the study of. It's the study of how your life is composed of the same elements as everybody else's, but in a different spectrum of color, so to speak, a different spectrum of shadow, a different composition of dark and light. It's a picture of your life. And that's what the Gene Keys tries to paint by giving you the hologenetic profile that you can type in your birth time and everything and begin to understand. And so what we're doing when we're unlocking the gift is learning the story of a shadow and a gift pair. That story, once you learn it, once you're aware of it consciously, you're no longer living it automatically and unconsciously. And you can begin to transform that victim perspective, that shadow perspective, through the awareness of it into the hero's response. In SEM, we talk a lot about the reaction and the response. That's not something that the Gene Keys talks about very much at all or in those specific terms, but that's something that you've been learning that we can apply to this today. And just so you know, really absorb this. I'm going to give you the slides after the presentation, so you'll have all of that. No need to take crazy notes. Just write your questions down and really participate in contemplating and absorbing this. Okay, so unlocking the gift is learning the story so that you can become the hero of your story. And now let's take a pause, just reflect on that, and we're going to talk about what the Gene Keys are. Okay. Take a minute to write any questions down if you have them. So the Gene Keys have a very extensive and somewhat complex history, but it comes from a basis in very universal truths. On the one hand, we have the I Ching, which is a several thousand-year-old storybook, really, of the 64 hexagrams, or the 64 colors, the 64 energies that exist in life. No one really knows where the I Ching came from. It's kind of biblical in that sense that its origins are rather unclear and very, very mythical. No one knows for sure about the author, but it is a collection of 64 stories composed of either a masculine or composed of different, like if you look closely at the four things orbiting around the yin and the yang, the center here, those are either, those are the founding blocks, the building blocks of the hexagrams, that word hexagram. And the straight lines are masculine, the open broken lines are feminine. And so with that, you can build hexagrams composed of 6 lines total, either open or broken, and you get 64 different possible combinations. And from that, they have birthed the story of the dance of life, the dance of masculine and feminine, through all the way from the very first hexagram, which is 4 unbroken lines. I can show you it here. Or not 4, I'm sorry, 6. So in the gene keys, you'll see right there in the top left corner, the 6 unbroken lines. That is the primary masculine. It's the first gene key. Then in the second, 6 open lines, and that is the primary feminine. And from that original story, we can paint all 64 combinations. And that is the art of life. It's the dance of energy through the organism. And then from a very scientific perspective, we also get at the very core of our DNA, built into our physical vessel, the instructions for every cell in your body. There are just 64 different codons. Codons, we'll talk more about it, but that is the foundation for the science of life. And so 64 is kind of this magical number. And when I give you these slides, you can also click the link down there and learn more about the significance of the number 64 through all different sects of symbolic study and numerology. But when we notice this, that both science and spirituality, the ancient text and the modern perspective had found this magic connection, well, then we started, Richard Rudd and others who were originators of the exploration of this coincidence or synchronicity began to ask, okay, well then, can we map together the stories of these two wheels that we have here, these two pairings? And that's what they began to do. And then they found out that there are all kinds of different spectrums, like the Jewish calendar, or really the Kabbalistic symbolism, as well as the 12 houses of the zodiac, and etc. And this is what the Gene Keys is made of. Not just, pulling things out of thin air, but the Gene Keys is a synthesis, an integration of things that have been discovered throughout the ages, universal truths that no matter how you approach your study of life, whether from the most religious and mystical end of the spectrum or the most scientific through genetics itself and the makeup of our being through science, you begin to discover the archetypes, the stories behind it. We'll talk more about it, but this image is profound because this is us. It says it in the Gene Keys. You are DNA inhabiting a physical body. You are the instructions creating the body and experiencing life. And that is like when they say you came to Earth to live the human experience, you're a spiritual being living a human experience. This is the information that has somehow organized itself through the millennia of your family lineage to create you and your experience. And it's founded on very, very, very simple elements. There are 21 different amino acids that combine in different ways to create various proteins. There are so many different proteins that make up the physical body that you're made of, that you are. But it is just the different composition of the instructions in your DNA. let's go through a couple of fun facts about DNA, because this is the foundation. Okay, so DNA is the instructions for building your body, and it is responsible for the creation of all 60 plus trillion of your cells. And DNA works pretty much exactly the same in all living organisms. Of course, we only have organisms on Earth to study, but even us humans, we are only the difference between all humans is only the difference of about 0.1% variation in genetic expression. And I list this because I want to point it out for the sake that I already mentioned the collective unconscious. And this might be, theoretically, the home of the collective unconscious. If your DNA is 99.9% identical to all other human beings who currently live and all others who have lived since Homo sapien, the species Homo sapien, evolved, then would this not be our shared story? Would this not be the library of evolution itself? Just something to consider. So then there's also some fascinating stuff that is just touched on in the introduction to the Gene Keys that I've linked one of the very interesting sources that I discovered beneath here. But DNA is electromagnetically sensitive, which means that as a salt, DNA conducts electricity rather well. But at the same time, nobody can get DNA to conduct electricity in a reliable fashion. This source that I linked down here is a study on why this might be, and it at the end makes no certain conclusions whatsoever. But it's very confusing because DNA is either an insulator, meaning it totally resists electromagnetic impulses, or it's a superconductor. It covers the whole spectrum. It can be one of the most efficient or one of the least efficient conductors of electricity. And we have yet to figure out how that works. And at the same time, your brain, your heart, and your gut as organs in your body all work together, all of the cells in your body work together to conduct electricity as electromagnetism. And so that is like the human aura, which you should learn about if you haven't. But it is a scientific fact that you project energy beyond just your skin. And that's the reason why when someone walks into a room, you can feel their vibe. Our auras overlap and our hearts connect, and we can feel each other just through presence without even necessarily making eye contact. So DNA is magical stuff. And the story behind all of this essentially is that it is not, well, how do I put this? I would say that every cell in your body, which must contain DNA because that's how it's constructed, is at all times listening and responding. There's a field of study that is really the cutting edge of this called epigenetics that I mention a lot in various videos in SEM. But epigenetics is the study of how the environment influences your DNA through electricity and electromagnetism. And so that 0.1% of genetic variation between all human beings is a result of not only who you come from, but the environment that you're raised in. For example, there are many studies where they identify two twins who were separated at birth, and they look at the different ways that their genes have expressed themselves because of the variation in environment as they've grown up. And so the point of this is to say that your cells, the DNA within your cells, the instructions, the constructors behind the proteins that are your body, they are listening and responding to your environment. And what is your environment? Well, it is not only your physical environment outside of your skin, but your primary environment is your body. And that last bullet point, your brain, heart, and gut being electromagnets. Your brain is the home of your thoughts, and your thoughts create a frequency. That's why we can measure them in an MRI. And so does your heart, and so does your gut. They're neural centers. They're chakras. The chakras are nothing more than nerve ganglia where energy, electricity concentrates itself in your cells. And so all of the other cells in your body are working together in a way that they can't understand, but that they are programmed to perform based on the instructions they receive from your DNA. And where does your DNA receive instructions from? On how to activate the expression of different genes, the construction of your extremities, like your fingers, hands, toes, and feet, as well as the construction of the glands. And this is very important, the different hormones that you secrete at different levels. Because essentially, emotion is all just a hormonal state. It's just the unique chemistry within your body. And so you cannot study the organism without also studying it within its environment. And this is really, really important, because what is the difference between the environment and the organism? There is none, because they are interdependent, they are connected, and one is the expression of the other. To put this in a more Alan Watts way, you've never found a place where there are bees but no flowers, and no flowers but no bees, because there is really just one happening, one unfolding, one event expressing itself through this dance that the Gene Keys tells us about, that the I Ching originally identified as the simple dance between darkness and light, masculine and feminine, yin and yang. And so this can get really confused really fast, but remember that it's always just founded on the different concentrations of dark and light, shadow and gift, yin and yang, off and on. And that is how your environment becomes you. And you are your environment at the same time. And so, to just summarize this portion, the Gene Keys is a way to unite the macro and the micro, the cosmic and the atomic, the art of life and the science behind it. But the question, of course, then is how, and how do we actually feel this as a truth within ourselves? And it's through working with the archetypes. The archetypes, again, are the truth of the hidden patterns within the story of the universe. Whether you're looking at just a couple of atoms becoming an amino acid, becoming a protein, becoming you, becoming the human race, or you're looking at the way that the stars and the planets bounce around, there are these masculine and feminine aspects, these commonalities of the story. So no matter the scale of the story, whether it's cellular or planetary, whether it's human or animal, there are these certain universal thematic story arcs or archetypes. Like, think about when a white blood cell consumes an invading virus, or if two planets impact each other. You can think of one being kind of like the victim and one being not necessarily the hero, but maybe the attacker, or yes, maybe the hero, or the lost one, the accident, the haphazard, or whatever. These are words that I say that contain stories, and they exist at every stop along the spectrum of scale. And so the archetypes are the keys. The keys themselves, all 64 of them, are different archetypes, different colors through which life paints the picture of your life in a unique way. Making sense? Let me get some nods. We're deep in it now. Good. So let's connect the dots even more. I've mentioned the DNA, the molecules, the amino acids that build the proteins, but this is where it really comes together. And this is the real map of the Gene Keys. This is not the one that they give you, but this is the one that really shows you the physical genetic gene I Ching, as Richard Rudd calls it so aptly. And I'll show you mine here. And so what you'll see is I've filled them in according to my hologenetic profile. And so this is my unique map. And that'll come back later into relevance. But basically what you need to know is that these two things, these two images that you see, are one and the same. There are 21 amino acids on the left and 21 rings on the right. On the left are their scientific names. On the right are their archetypal story names, like literally like the names given to the characters in the story within your cells. And so if you actually count the amino acids on the left, there's 22, and that's because there's one special amino acid. And the Gene Keys is still integrating and figuring that out, trying to catch up. But that's because it can only be composed in a lab. And so it's kind of like uranium. It's like an unstable amino acid. Doesn't necessarily occur in nature. I'm not sure if uranium does or not, but point anyway. So the numbers that you see on the right here in the gene keys codon rings are the gene keys themselves. And each one is representative of a shadow, a gift, and a siddhi, a story. And each story is integrated into the whole story. All right. This might be another point where you have some questions, and that's totally fair as well. You have to take everything that I'm sharing with a grain of salt, because this is not the system that I derived, and so I can't explain it in the full depth and background. The gene keys even doesn't even bother. There's a line in the introduction to the gene keys where most of this information is coming from that says, like, we're not going to take a deep dive into this now. But this is what I've gathered through my studies over the year or so that I've been kind of swallowed by this. So connecting the dots, again, we have the art of life and the science of life. And we have the genetic story, which becomes your life story, your environment, which is you, and you, which create your environment as the consciousness and the awareness dancing through your mind, heart, gut, your chakra system. That is the dance. And how do you really come into play? Now, this is where astrology gets linked. That which you see on the left here is the map of the I Ching archetypes, which are the organic, artful, energetic aspects, with linked with the astrological or planetary archetypes that have been long been a part of zodiac symbolism, the 12 different zodiac houses. And so this is a combination of the zodiac and the genetic gene I Ching that Richard Rudd devised. And so what you can do with this, and where the hologenetic profile comes from, your unique profile, is by mapping astrology and the position of the planets and really the holographic image of the universe, which was unique and is unique at every time that exists. Like, the planets are constantly moving, and was at a certain position when you were born. We can use that to connect the dots and get a map of the destiny that is waiting to be unlocked through your shadows in your DNA. Take a minute to absorb that and think of any other questions that you might have, and we'll continue on. Cool. So then let's talk a little bit more specifically about navigating the gene keys and what this would look like if you were to begin your voyage. There's the main book, the one that contains all of the 64 stories, the archetypes of each shadow, gift, and siddhi, which are, again, like the colors on the palette of the universe. And then there are the books that guide you through the main book, and those are called the Golden Path series. There are 4, and they're actually out of order in this picture. It's Genius, Love, Prosperity. And we'll talk more about these in just a moment, but this is the way that you are guided through your profile and the different specific details of your unique sequence, and the stories told within each sphere of life, which are kind of like the areas of life in the whole life assessment that you've taken at least once or twice so far in SEM. So then, working with the gene keys, and I apologize in advance, these slides are a bit full of words, but I want to read them and just introduce you to these concepts, and it's really, I couldn't reduce it any farther. So again, coming back to that word I told you to keep in mind at the beginning, harmony. Harmony means union with your own divinity. Your higher purpose, being harmony, is to share your unique genius with the world. And genius is not intellectual, but intelligent. This is a really important differentiation that the gene keys makes many times throughout the stories within each of the 64 stops at each hexagram. You don't want to be overly intellectual, and you want to balance it with the intelligence of the heart. which is not mental, but heartfelt. And so harmony is the balance between thinking and feeling, which is a very, very popular theme, obviously. And so genius, what that means, the genius sequence, is living your life without holding anything back, owning and transcending your fears through owning them, letting go, releasing the gift so that it comes into your life. And this is what makes you a truly joyous human being. Really, your higher purpose, harmony, is to just be radiant for no reason at all, other than just simply being alive in a body. Like if you just love being alive in your body, then you are in harmony. And all of those primary questions, what is my purpose? Are my relationships fulfilling? Am I part of my community? Am I prospering? Those fade away because the answer is yes. And it's almost silly to ask that question. And so the Gene Keys themselves are like the gardening manual. This is a direct line quote from the Gene Keys that will guide you through the growing process. But the seeds are already inside of you. They're waiting in your DNA. They're the stories that have, throughout the 10,000 generations of human beings that have led you to this point, that have uniquely composed the story of your life up until this point and will continue to do so. And your choice is whether or not to open your heart to those stories and to bring them into conscious awareness and to achieve harmony. And so this is called a voyage of letting go. And this is what makes the Gene Keys very different from astrology or from any symbolism, really, any mystical study. And this slide and the next was where we'll talk about it. So fear is, in fact, the raw material of the higher states. These are quotes from the Gene Keys. And so fear must be passed through. You can't avoid it. You can't transcend it in any other way other than making space for it and saying, welcome, let's dance. So every shadow is really just the gift in and of itself. It's part of the same story, but it's the fear of either owning the responsibility that you must have for that gift and what comes with that responsibility, the power, or it's the fear of releasing that and saying, you know what, I'm fine with the shadow. And that sounds funny to say, I'm fine with this shadow, but it is through the fear that you become fine with the fear, with the pain. And that is when it begins to heal, because you can't heal if you are in a state of tight resistance, if you are in the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, chemical bath of hormones and adrenaline and stress that your body becomes when you're fighting the fear. Once you relax into it, that is when it becomes a gift. And so it's paradoxical. Paradox is really the solution to all of the logical problems or questions that you hold in your mind. We'll talk more about that at the end if you have questions. That's a fun one. But so anyway, to forgive yourself of the shadow is to give yourself the gift, the genius of the gift. And that constant self-forgiveness is something we'll talk about again more precisely in a moment. I have a passage that I want to read, but the journey through the Gene Keys is a journey through all of the great human lives, because it's the universal stories beneath them. So when I say arrogance or leadership, you know that story. You could probably think of a US president or someone maybe more specific in your life who has overcome the shadow of arrogance, or perhaps maybe not, to embrace the gift of leadership. And so this is the universal story of passing through each of the 64 types of fear, okay? And so in this voyage of letting go, another quote, very important one from the Gene Keys that applies to all of life itself and the wisdom that you acquire on your journey, is that this is a wild wisdom as opposed to a systematic or logical process. There's no set pathway through fear or through your inner being. You have to work out all of the teachings for yourself and inside of yourself. There's no guru, there's no guide, not even me, to show you the way. I'm simply opening the door. All anyone can ever do for you is open doors, present opportunities, perhaps even in the form of problems or challenges. And there's no technique unless you invent your own. That's a theme that we'll talk about in this section, Inventing Your Voyage. But this is really about dismantling concepts as opposed to adding new ones. So you'll study astrology and you'll gather all of these labels and concepts. You'll study the document U in module 3 that guides you through like 9-10 different avenues of self-study. And you'll get all of these labels and categories for yourself. And you will in the Gene Keys too. But the purpose of the Gene Keys and what makes them different is that it allows you to drop out of the thinking about the concepts and into the feeling of them. And when you feel the concepts, you stop thinking them and you start knowing them. You stop trying to be them and you start being them, whether it's a shadow or a gift. And you have to be okay dropping into the shadow and being the shadow if you want to get through it, if you want to face the fear by completely surrendering to the fear and come out on the other side. And so the lesson is that transformation really only happens of its own accord. It's a spontaneous thing. In the video Common Ground, it's discussed as breakthrough. And breakthrough happens just because you're ready for it. And it's a spontaneous thing. It's almost acausal. The only real cause of a breakthrough is exposure to the frequency that you are hoping to embrace, embody, or release. And so the Gene Keys kind of coins itself as the book that talks to your DNA. And the reason that it's called that is because it literally does speak to your DNA. If you just concentrate on the words and you read them like you're studying for a test, you're not going to let the frequency into your heart because it'll get stuck in your brain. And therefore, you're not letting it all the way in. You're not opening your heart all the way. For example, if you just open your heart to it and you meditate on the concept of a shadow and a gift, that archetype, and you don't think about it, you just feel it, you're just meditating. You're not concentrating. And contemplation is that middle way. It's what we talk about in Common Ground, where you have to let it in fully. And the breakthrough will happen spontaneously because you are exposing yourself, bathing yourself in the story, the frequency, and you're letting the conscious layer on top slip out of its kind of pedestal of importance that we place it on almost all times. Just another pause to take a sip of water and let you think of any questions you might have. I'm glad that it's making sense and clear. I'm happy with how the chat looks. And so, like I said a moment ago, there's a new kind of thinking emerging, and that is knowing. And that is like your cells, they know. You think, your cells together, they think, but each one doesn't think. Your cells could be like kind of, imagine if you and I and all of us here together were not people made of 60 trillion plus cells, but we were one cell, each of us. And we formed collectively the single organism that is humanity here on Earth. It's almost as if human beings as individuals don't think for ourselves, right? We just kind of act on our like animal instincts and our fears, but we all kind of make progress and contribute a little bit to the collective. And over the long story arc of humanity, 10,000 generations, look at how far we've come. And it might not feel like we've come so far because we still have so many problems, but we've solved so many. And in another 10,000 years, not even 10,000 years, but 100,000 years, if we live roughly 70, 80, maybe 100 years per generation, that is a long time to make even more progress. And so to say that the world is getting worse is to look very, very short term. Things really do seem to be getting better all the time if you open your heart to that, the gift of that possibility. But the parallel metaphor that I was attempting to draw is that the cells in your body don't think for themselves, and they certainly do not understand the whole, the mass within which they operate, the instructions that they are from which they are built. the cells, like us, don't understand our true higher purpose. But if we can drop into that knowing, we can fall into harmony. And there's no thinking as a part of that. And so Richard Rudd aptly reminds us that the gene keys are a living, breathing transmission. It's not just another information system for you to reinforce your thinking with, but it's a way to expose yourself to the raw frequency of the stories that have always and will always exist, so that you can learn them and learn to respond from the hero's perspective instead of react from the victim perspective, and embrace the shadow to unlock the gift. And so this is an inner language that you learn. If you take the dive into the gene keys, you'll want to share the breakthroughs that you're experiencing and the realizations and connections that you're learning, but they won't be relevant to anyone else because it's an inner language that you're learning. And so it's an inner language to face the fears at work inside of you so that you can get to the other side. Now let's talk about the journey. Quick pause, another sip of water. Just a little bit more. This is going a little bit longer than I anticipated, so I'll hurry up. These are a little bit of the simpler concepts. We're through the most dense part. So we're back to the three primary questions of purpose, love, and prosperity. Glad you're loving it, Sandra. So these questions, remind you, don't exist when you are in harmony. But harmony is only half of the equation, the yang to the yin. And so releasing your need to always exist in harmony means that you will have to encounter these questions roughly half of the time, and that's okay. And so the Gene Keys gives you 3 different sequences through which you can contemplate the spheres or gene keys that correspond with your specific genetic makeup based on when and where you were born, to contemplate that which might bring you back to the state of harmony. And that's what the Gene Keys does through their frequency. And so you see below the 3 different paths, and I'll show you what they look like together here. So you see the green one is on the outside, the 4 spheres connecting as a kind of Z formation, which leads into the Venus sequence, which has to do with love and opening your heart. And then the third is the prosperity sequence, or the Pearl sequence, which has to do with community and service and such things. And so when you get your hologenetic profile, you'll see all these different, it'll look crazy. But there are just simple components that will be the same for all of you. The spheres and the pathways. These don't change at all, depending on any of the information that you put in. These are always the same. And so it begins with your life's work, flowing through the pathway of challenge that you see here to, here we'll look at them together. Evolution, breakthrough, core stability from radiance to purpose. Radiance is, why don't I just do a quick overview of some of the more difficult to understand right off the bat spheres. Radiance is health. Purpose is pretty self-explanatory. Attraction is like that aura, how you call in relationships. The IQ, EQ, and SQ. And by the way, these are all described in very great detail in these books, the 3 books that guide you through the sequences. But just as you have an intelligence quotient, which is IQ, you also have an emotional quotient, which is the degree to which your heart is open to emotional experience. And you have the SQ, which is spiritual quotient, which is the way that your spirit and your cells are open to the instructions of higher purpose and harmony. Vocation is the way in which the core wound that you are born with, really the core shadow here, becomes your purpose in life, your vocation, your purpose for service. So that one is also, it's half blue because the Venus sequence calls it the core wound, and half red because the Pearl sequence calls it the vocation, because they are kind of one and the same. And you'll see how the life's work is also called, in the blue sequence, the Pearl, the brand. I'm just going over this quickly because this is, again, something that you'll need to take your time to really sink into. But then also The purpose, this one shares the title purpose in both the Venus, the red sequence, and the activation sequence, the green. Pearl is prosperity. It has to do with abundance, and really the word is prosperity because abundance means having a lot, whereas prosperity means having enough. And then culture is really like your culture, your race, your background, your lineage, and insights into what you've picked up in that sphere of life. And so again, these all are the same no matter who you are, when you were born or where. What changes are these things. The name of the sphere stays the same, but the number, the gene key, and the line number. We'll talk more about the lines at the end. That's one of the deeper details that really does add a lot of color to the keys, but not something that you necessarily need. Let's see. And then each sphere will be associated either numerically with a gene key, 1 of 64, and of course the shadow, the gift, and the city. So here you see the sphere, the labels. Again, I'll give you all of these slides after the fact. But so this is kind of a breakdown of what you'll see in your Gene Keys profile. And let's see, do we have mine? I don't think we do, but you have likely seen your Gene Keys profile. You can look at it and turn on or off the different labels on the website, or download it and begin to just follow the Gene Keys through. And that's what we're going to talk about on this slide. So you can journey through the keys many different ways. And I don't mean to brag, but I worked with I believe the best Gene Keys guide that I could find on the internet for a period of 3 months this year. And he repeatedly told me, Lola, he repeatedly complimented me on how creative I was with working with the keys, not just sequentially as the books share, but intuitively in many different ways. And so I want to introduce you to some of the different ways that I invented my voyage and kind of became my guide through the Gene Keys, because I think I would hope that it would inspire you on your journey as well. So sequentially is the way that the Gene Keys wants you to work, and the sequence really does hold magic. So if you do begin with the Gene Keys, I highly recommend one of these first 3 that is listed here. I started with kind of like the medium speed and just was reading sequentially, beginning with Life's Work, Evolution, Radiance, following the path through the 3 sequential books, and just kind of picking up the next key when I felt like it was time. Because each key that I would read, I would contemplate the themes, expose myself to the frequency in the story, and then like magic, it would just happen. It would play out in real time in my life. So I started with My Life's Work up at the top, which is where everybody should start. And that is the 64th Gene Key for me, which is the very last one. And I was fascinated by that because my journey kind of begins with the end. And in that journey, the shadow is confusion. The gift is imagination. The city is illumination. And I saw that and I was like, confusion has always plagued me as the shadow. That was my original doorway into the keys. It was like, why is that so precise? And one of the things you'll learn in the Gene Keys is that the Life's Work and Evolution, the first 2 spheres, are always programming partners, which are matches. Each of the 64 Gene Keys is matched with another one on the map. So you can see like the original I Ching has them all listed, all the hexagrams listed in a sphere. And each one has one that is directly across from it, which is the programming partner. And so the green ones are, these 2 are programming partners, which is another way that you can move through the keys I'll talk about in just a sec. But then the shadow of evolution for me is doubt. Doubt, inquiry is the gift, and truth is the city. And that just rang so true, and it pulled me in even further. And I felt as I read these, like the truth of that, and how self-discovery was the first pillar of the spiritual thematic study that really pulled me into this work that I have found so fulfilling. But it was doubt and about my path and the inquiry into myself that led to evolution, as the sphere is so accurately called. And this has only gotten deeper as I've kind of gone through the whirlpool deeper into the center of the keys. And so I started just following the themes and kind of intuitively following a pace that was roughly about one sphere per week, or a little bit faster than that, like maybe even one every couple of days. And eventually I reached the end, and that was when I was like, all right, I need an expert, because it goes so deep. And so I had finished my first lap when I enlisted my mentor, and I started again. And that time I started not only reading the key that was associated with my sphere, but the programming partner as well, because confusion and doubt, being programming partners in the first two spheres of my profile, are kind of yin and yang: confusion, doubt. And you know the story, right? And so then I started reading them together, as if, like, for example, attraction down here. This one is not paired with its programming partners like the green spheres are. And so that one is the, what is it? The 31st gene key for me, which is the programming partner of, I think it is the 32nd gene key, maybe the Venus sequence is. But regardless, I started reading the programming partners of each of the spheres alongside it to get the yin or yang, the opposite expression of the story, to get a deeper insight into my blind spots. Because reading the gene key of your sphere might be so deeply embedded in your unconscious that you struggle to bring it to the surface. And so exposing yourself to the programming partner as well might kind of shine light into the blind spots. And so that's another way to kind of deepen your voyage through the keys. Then I have the reminder of meditate, contemplate, and concentrate, which are the three paths of integrating the frequency or the archetype. And so you can either lap your way through the keys and at each sphere, on each key, meditate, like strictly meditate and open your heart to the concept by meditating on it, then contemplate it and study it with both an open heart and open mind, or then purely concentrate on it in a way that is kind of like studying for a test. And if you do all three, you kind of cover your bases in different ways, exposing both your mind and your heart in different environments and different intensities. And so I've done that as well. On the one hand, I've kind of like, I'll just, well, I won't pull it up, I won't bother you, but I've literally just typed out a summary of all of the information from each key that resonates the most with what I'm working with on each point. And that is a very concentration-based way of navigating the keys. And then, of course, there are a couple others listed, like moving backwards. So the gene keys is actually sequentially backwards from your birth through your life. And so life's work is the first gene key, but it's actually the one that you end up at. You know, it is through finding your purpose and embracing your health and radiance and allowing your essence to shine through, that you break through into an evolution that eventually leads and becomes your life's work. And so you can go backwards. Another thing I've done is, while reading the gene keys, I've also gone and created a piece of art for each of the spheres. That's something that I'm actually still in the middle of, because it's such a very slow process that I haven't made my way through the entire profile. And then one other thing that I will share with you that has really, really awakened the magic is the Wisdom Keepers. This deck here. I'll elaborate on programming partner in a second. But the Wisdom Keepers are a deck that someone, not the author of the gene keys, but somebody who is friends with the Richard Rudd, created these lovely cards so that you can pull one of the 64 and connect with a specific archetype through a face and a story, if you ever feel like you need some more intuitive or magical insight. But of course, you can also just open the book randomly, which I do all the time. During the phase in which I was going into do my dark retreat, the wisdom keepers were really there for me. In fact, over the period of 3 months when I was working with my mentor, Dan, my Gene Keys guide specifically, I only pulled 7 cards. And each time over the period of 3 months, I pulled the same card each time. And I wrote a little story about that in a post, and the whole story about the dark retreat it's at the link in my bio on my website. But anyway, these are just some ideas for you for inventing your voyage. And now lastly, the last section, some of the deeper details. I'm just going to touch on them because I only mean to pique your interest. First, I'll talk about the programming partners. Amina's question. I was just saying how you can see each of the different 64 hexagrams from the original I Ching listed in a circle. And each of the 64 hexagrams, which are also the 64 gene keys, has a partner directly across the map from it. And so each one has the yin to its yang or vice versa. It has a different expression. And so a programming partner is, for example, like in my life's work sphere, it's a 64th gene key, with a programming partner of which is the 63rd. They're not always sequential like that, but they share really closely tied themes like confusion and doubt, inquiry and imagination. Is that making sense? Seeing some head nods, cool. Now some of the other deeper details. So if you take a look, I don't have an example in the slides, but if you take a real close look at my profile, you'll see actually we do have in the slides here. Each sphere has not only the number of the gene key, but also the line. There are 6 lines. Lines are not the pathways or lines that connect the spheres, but lines are different expressions of the personality that can live the story of any particular gene key. And so the gene key is the language and the line is the font, so to speak. Like you kind of use that metaphor of the colors in which the picture is painted. The line, I actually have more details about those that I'll get to in a sec. Sandra, I see your question below that I'll just get to real quick. I mean, literally create a piece of art representing the themes from each gene key or sphere. And so for me, my favorite medium of art is collage. And so I've literally begun taking the time to sit in my little closet art studio and collage the themes that I gather from contemplating, reading the book for each theme. All right. Then there are the natures. Each single gene key has a shadow, and each shadow has different expressions, expressive tendencies. And so there is reaction and repression. And so this is kind of like the inner and the outer manifestation of each shadow. So let me see if I can give you an example. Let's pick a good one. The 7th gene key, the shadow is division, okay? Division. The repressive nature is hiding, and the reactive nature is dictatorial, like it's just kind of acting as a dictator and imposing yourself in terms of dividing others like a dictator does, in a reactive sense, which is imposing on the world, whereas the repressive sense is hiding from the world, dividing yourself, cutting yourself off from the world. And so that story is contained within not just that gene key and the words division, hiding, and dictatorialness, but each of the shadows has either an inner repressive tendency or an outer reactive tendency that corresponds kind of with the yin and the yang. Another way of understanding that is as the reactive tendency is unable to embrace the shadow or admit it, whereas the repressive tendency is unwilling to do that. Okay. And then lastly, since we have barely touched on the cities, and the reason for this is because as the divine gifts, they are like transcendent in nature. And there is not much that can really be said about the cities because the cities are beyond language. They are ineffable. They are paradoxical in the sense that it is not something that you learn. It's something that you dissolve into. The city is when you embrace the gift and the shadow to such an extent that the shadow and the gift concepts become essentially irrelevant, and you entirely embrace the notion that the shadow and the gift are mutually they arise mutually, and you cannot have one without the other. So why would you feel differently about the shadow than you do the gift, or vice versa? And when you awaken to that, you, as the Gene Keys say, or as spiritualists say, you die into it, because your identification, your attachment that you have to getting the gift and ridding yourself of the city, it falls away. And because you see the paradoxical nature of that rat race, that hamster wheel of chasing one and not the other, because chasing one and not the other is running away from the one and not the other. So the cities are kind of the ineffable, enlightened state in which words really do fail to describe the state of being. Just another quick look at the lines, and then we'll I think this might be the last or second to last slide, just to clarify for you. So you will read one of the 64 gene keys that corresponds to any one of the spheres that we've talked about. But if you do it through these books will tell you how to interpret each sphere, and it contains 6 different lines. You can see like the text, the lines of the life's work. And those are the 6 different archetypes within the archetypes, the different life stories within the greater story that come with all kinds of different characteristics, so to speak, and different associations, such as the individual, the one-on-one relationship, the family, community, collective, and the cosmos itself. And this is where things begin to get complicated, and no one can guide you. You simply have to open your heart and your mind and your solar plexus to the possibilities, the concepts, and you have to really drop into contemplation. And so that's why I just introduce it, because I hope that it piques your curiosity. Again, I want to remind anyone who might be intimidated by the complexity of the gene keys that that is exactly one of the shadows at work. And there is no end to working in this way. There is no end to shadow work. There is only coming in and out of harmony. And so if at any point you've had this concept, this thought pop into your head of like, this is too much, that is because you believe that there is too much work ahead to get to some end goal. But if you forget about that end goal, you can simply play and explore in a fun way. And if there's any point that Richard Rudd attempts to make in the beginning introduction to this massive 500, 600, maybe even 700-page book, it is, don't take this seriously. Take it as a child would and play. I see all of you with your brows furrowed and your pens in your hands, and I want you to like literally sit back and kind of just laugh at yourself, because you have to do both at the same time. There's the dark and the light, the concentration and the meditation, all one and the same. And so you got to spiral through it, through every aspect of it. You got to allow yourself to forget and to forgive yourself. And so again, this is the last slide for sure. Yeah, it is the goal of harmony, which is harmony within the whole, and individuation, a word I'm introducing now at the very end that I will read you a small passage about, which is harmony within the self, which is the whole. The environment and the organism that you are one and the same. And so this quote that I'll share is, an individuated human being is a person whose inner life is in, not an, exact harmony with our outer life. Just some typos there, but take a minute to sink into this. I'm going to make sure I'm on the right page. I want to read some words from the first sequence book. So this is titled Individuation, the Purpose of the Journey. And so the final goal of the Golden Path, which is the whole path of the Gene Keys, is to bring you to a state known as individuation. Individuation refers to a process whereby the many different aspects of your life, your dreams, your relationships, your health, finances, spirituality, are all brought together into an integrated harmony. An individuated human being is a person whose inner life is in exact harmony with their outer life. In such a person, everything has become simple. The power of your aloneness is the font of your strength, but it in no way isolates you from the whole community. On the contrary, your aloneness, your individuation, serves to strengthen your bonds within yourself, within your community. In an individuated being, many emotional states are naturally processed and transmuted internally with far less friction, confusion, or energy loss. This also brings far more ease and simplicity into all of your relationships. The more individuated you become, the more energy efficient you become. At the same time, individuation does not mean that you become more spiritual. It retains full involvement of our passions and those difficult states that we often refer to as shadows. You cannot escape them. The difference between an individuated human being and a conditioned human being is that the individuated human being lives in a state of self-forgiveness. Individuation should be understood as different from any so-called spiritual state. It is not the same as enlightenment or realization or attainment. Rather, it is the prerequisite for such states. Individuation speaks of an inner maturity in which the hungry search for spiritual truth and results has settled down inside, bringing our whole system into a profound sense of balance, simplicity, and ease. When we come into a state of individuation, our spirituality is entirely internalized. We are naturally inclined to speak less about our insight in our seeing and to maintain appropriate boundaries around ourselves emotionally, physiologically, and psychologically. At the same time, we find that the ordinary world around us is more welcoming and fruitful, and we meet it with a refreshing sense of openness. The individuated human being rarely separates him or herself from the world or the marketplace of service, but is content to move among the world as an ordinary person. Individuation is a powerful and humble place to arrive at in your life. It may not appear to the externally hungry mind as such, but it conveys the secret weight of the patience and calm that you have anchored deep into your DNA. To be individuated is to court the subtle and the invisible at the same time. It is to shine out with the light of your humanity. To tread the golden path through the Gene Keys is a grand adventure. It is an ancient adventure closed in a contemporary form. While its potential is life-changing, much depends upon you, the voyager. You are invited to bring your full imaginative self into the process. It is your journey into your own life, and the more honest and aware you can be with yourself, the more you can live in a state of self-forgiveness, the more profound your inner illumination will be. So that went much longer than I anticipated, but I hope that it was packed with information and that I was clear. I also hope that I've created just enough questions, curiosity, and a little bit of tension about this journey, but more than anything, inspired you and made sense of quite a few things as well.